right, welcome to session 3 of Evergreen's Missional Partnership class. This session, we are going to be looking at church leadership and governance. So, the Book of Discipline is where our governance and our theology and our everything is kind of housed in this Book of Discipline. And so it serves as the kind of regulatory manual of the Free Methodist Church. The local church we use the Book of Discipline to adapt our own structures and processes. It lays out wisdom and some structure, but then local churches have some freedom to adapt. And so I want to talk about kind of 4 different types of church governance or polity that exist out there. So the first is papacy, which this is, the Roman Catholic Church. And so the Pope is ordained for life and speaks with equal authority to Scripture. Cardinals serve underneath, and priests, deacons. It's very hierarchical. And yeah, I'm not really going to say much about that, but that's, it's a form of government, of church government, and that's called the papacy. The second is what's called episcopacy. And so this would be like the Church of England, the Episcopal Church, the United Methodist Church, a lot of more, I hate to say it, but the more liturgical churches are more Episcopal churches, but not all. And so in an Episcopal system, you have bishops who are elected for life, and they again have authority over the church in all matters. Typically, in true Episcopal systems, the clergy tend to have more of the power and the say, and then there's some lay involvement. And then, probably what most of you all are familiar with, at least historically, people who have come into Evergreen are usually coming from a congregational style church. And so, this is where your non-denominational churches, your Baptist churches, a lot of your Reformed churches, Presbyterian churches, that there is no authority. So in these other systems, these are churches that are connected relationally and under the authority of an overseeing body. Whereas in a congregational model, each church is just kind of an island unto themselves. And these types of churches will typically join relational networks because they're isolated and alone, but there's no accountability in the networks. And so usually an elder board and the laity have the majority say in these types of systems. It's called a call system. So a church will post a job for a pastor, and then the local church has the ability to hire. And whereas in an Episcopal system, the denominational body sends pastors or priests to those churches, and the congregation doesn't really have a say at all. And so congregational is the opposite of that. And so and they're usually independent or autonomous churches. In the Free Methodist Church, we have what's called a modified Episcopal system. And so our bishops serve as really a general superintendent, and bishops are elected for a 4-year term. The bishop serves on a team, so that we currently have 3 bishops, and the one who gets the most votes serves as like the lead bishop. But really, that just means that the lead bishop puts together the agendas and stuff for the meeting, but they really serve as a team. And what's really unique about the Free Methodist Church, again, going back to our historic situation, is that at all levels within the church, local, regional, national, even international, we have equal representation between clergy and lay people. And then in our system, pastors, specifically lead pastors, all of our pastors are appointed to the local church. Like our membership as pastors is not to the local church. We are members of the Southern Michigan Conference. And so lead pastors are appointed. Our staff pastors are hired by the local church, and the local church will hire and the board will hire, and then we tell the conference, hey, like we're hiring Brad and as our associate pastor, and then the conference gives its kind of stamp, and that person is under appointment. So those are the 4: papacy, Episcopal, congregational, and then a modified episcopacy. So these are our current board of bishops. They were elected in 2023. So Bishop Keith Cowart has been serving since 2019. Bishop Kay Coldy was elected in 2023. She was most recently the pastor at the Arbor Church in Spring Arbor, Michigan. And then Bishop Kenny Martin has kind of served in local churches all across the country. But here you'll see these are their regions that they kind of oversee, and you'll also see these are the different Free Methodist conferences across the country. And so you'll see Bishop Kenny kind of presides oversight and leadership to the western part of the church. Bishop Kay, the Midwest, mostly the Midwest, and then Bishop Keith over the Southeast. And then we have a lot of work happening globally that's under the oversight of Free Methodist Church USA. And so each of the bishops have a global region that they also provide leadership and oversight to. And you'll see Bishop Kenny is Africa, Bishop Kay is Asia and Latin America, and then Bishop Keith is Europe, the Middle East, and UK and Ireland. And so these are the regions. So again, just for some touching back to the historical context, so the Free Methodist Church started in New York, and also there was a group in Illinois. And so you can see that the majority of Free Methodists exist here in the Midwest: Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York. This is where historically the majority of Free Methodists have existed. But again, we were a movement, and the church planted hundreds of churches over its first 40, 50 years. And we spread all over the country and sent missionaries all over the world. But this is nationally how we're structured. We also, every 4 years at General Conference, elect a board of administration. So these are clergy and lay folks from across this region. Each bishop's region gets to nominate certain people. And so there's an equal representation from all the bishops' regions, and they serve matters of governance, finance, risk mitigation, all that good stuff, which you'll see more details when we get to our local church board. But this is who's currently serving us from 2023 to 2027. So what's really unique about the Free Methodist Church that I love is that 94.6% of the Free Methodist Church exists outside the United States, and that the Free Methodist Church internationally is primarily that, an international community. And so we really get to be blessed and influenced by the global church. And so the Free Methodist Church USA is a part of the Free Methodist World Conference, which includes general conferences of Canada, Burundi, Egypt, Japan, India, Rwanda, Mozambique, the DRC, which is in Africa, the UK, South Africa, Dominican Republic, Brazil, the Philippines, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. So each of these countries, like the US, are fully self-sustaining, self-governing, all that stuff. The work that's happening in Africa, Asia, Europe, and all the rest of the world, the goal is that we're raising up slowly. And there's just as Evergreen went through a development process of being a church plant to a church fellowship to a church society, the international work goes through a process towards self-sustainability as well. If you go to the Free Methodist Church website, fmcusa.org, and you click the About tab, there's a whole summary of like things that I'm not going to cover in this video, but there is a Free Methodist World Missions video that's 7 minutes long that I encourage you to just check out, because it just gives you helpful perspective. That, again, I think that's one of the gifts and hopes that this missional partnership class will give you, is that Evergreen doesn't just exist on its own in its own echo chamber doing its own thing. We exist as part of a network of churches that's called the Southern Michigan Conference. We're going to get to that in a moment, but we exist as part of a national body of churches. And more than that, the Free Methodist Church exists internationally, and we share the same values, the same theology, the same history. And it's just truly wonderful to be a part of a global movement of disciples and of churches. So anyway, I encourage you to take you can pause the video and go watch and check out the website, but that is there for you. I believe in your book, you'll see on page 28, 29, and 30, you'll see some more details about Free Methodist World Missions and some of the projects that are happening overseas. So I want to focus now on the Southern Michigan Conference. So the Free Methodist Church USA is called the General Conference, and the General Conference is organized into annual conferences, which, as you saw on that map a few minutes ago, they're mostly geographical regions. There's one conference called the Reach Conference that's like a conference of mega churches, and they're kind of scattered throughout the country. But the Free Methodist Church currently has 21 annual conferences. Each annual conference elects a Free Methodist pastor or elder as the superintendent. The superintendent oversees vision alignment, implementation, leadership development, church health, church planting, etc. of the conference. So the Southern Michigan Conference is one of the oldest conferences in the denomination. The conference is, as of 2023, 158 years old. And just a fun fact is that two churches very close to us, Milan Free Methodist and Ypsilanti, are two of the oldest churches. They were some of the first Free Methodist churches planted in our region. And so our superintendent is Bruce Rhodes, and he's been serving since 2014. He's in his third term. So in the Southern Michigan Conference, our mission, you'll see the resonance with the denominational mission, is to partner together to ignite a spirit-fueled movement of disciples, leaders, and churches. And as a conference, all of our conference churches share 4 strategic priorities. And again, some of these for some churches are more aspirational than actual, but that's the work of all of us together, is to kind of move into the same direction. And so the 4 strategic practices that we engage are mobilizing prayer, deploying disciple makers, developing new leaders, and multiplying new churches. And so prayer, disciple making, leadership development, multiplication, these are the core practices and principles that exist at the heart of a church as a movement. And so prioritizing prayer, disciple making being central, developing and deploying new leaders, and then we'll see new churches be planted and new expressions of church. And that is moving us towards kind of this larger dream as a conference to see a network of 25,000 disciples. And so when you look at our piece of that for 2028 of Evergreen, which is 817 disciples, you'll see that's a chunk of this larger 25,000. And again, that's something we can't do on our own, but we have, so we have a lot of churches. So then that begs the question, so where are these churches across Southern Michigan? And so, well, here they are. So each of these dots represents a Free Methodist church that's fully established or a church plant. And so you'll see typically our Southern Michigan Conference has been the bottom 2 counties of the state of Michigan, but we have a couple outliers here. And this is us here at Evergreen, planted right in the middle. But as you know, we're in Ann Arbor, Ypsi, Brighton, and Milan, and hope to just saturate this region with the gospel of Jesus. But these are the churches spread across the conference, and all of these churches make up the Southern Michigan Conference of the Free Methodist Church. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but as a missional partner, one of your rights and privileges is to be nominated to serve on conference boards if the nominating team calls you. And so because again, all of our boards and committees have equal representation between pastors and lay people. And so our conference is led by our executive team, which is our superintendent, director of operations, finance. We have administration people, communication. Our conference has a board of administration. It's called the CLB, or the Conference Leadership Board. Again, equal representation of lay and clergy. We have the Ministerial Education and Guidance Board, the MEG. I've been serving on that for the last 7 years, and that oversees the development, credentialing, and ongoing care and education of our clergy and of the deacons as well. There's the MAC, or the Ministerial Appointments Committee. They're the group that every year, if there's pastors who are retiring or there's a pastoral transition, the MAC is the one that's prayerfully discerning across the network, where do our like who needs to go there to that church to serve and to lead that community. And then lastly, there's the nominating committee, which are the people who are looking at all of the missional partners and the key lay leaders and clergy across our conference, and prayerfully inviting and asking people, hey, would you consider serving a 3-year term on the MEG? Or would you consider serving on the conference leadership board for 3 years? And so your becoming a missional partner doesn't just give you access and ownership of the local church, but it also, you become a vital part of the conference network as well. And then it's, if you serve as a conference in a conference role, that also gives you the ability to be nominated to serve every 4 years at the general conference level. So I want to talk to you, kind of finish the session just talking a little bit about Mission Igniter and then our local church governance. So especially for those of you who are newer, you don't know this, and so I want you to kind of understand. But so Mission in 2016, 2017, the conference leadership was really discerning in what they called this 1036 campaign. So we feel that God wants us to plant 10 new churches in the next 36 months. And so our evergreen story is that we were one of these first 10 churches that were planted through Mission Igniter. So Mission Igniter was a church planting incubator that started out of our Dearborn church under the leadership of Dustin Weber, and it became a conference multiplication incubator. But now Mission Igniter serves nationally, and this is actually one of my other jobs that I serve co-vocationally, as I work for Mission Igniter as well as Evergreen. But the problem for Mission Igniter is that there's not a church for everyone. The solution is that we empower leaders and churches to multiply expressions of church, and that the outcome and the vision of Mission Igniter is that there would be an expression of church for all people in all places. And so you can see that there's this process that we have worked in. And I was one of the first church planters to walk through this process and to discover the holes and help fix them. And so I have real deep ownership and passion about this process, and I get to work with church planters now. But Evergreen was one of the first church plants planted through Mission Igniter. And what's really fascinating here is that from 1960 to 2015, the Southern Michigan Conference only planted 17 churches. So you can imagine that when in 2017, people heard leadership say, God's calling us to be a movement again. God is calling us to see 10 new churches planted in the next 36 months or 3 years. And people thought, you're out of your mind. That is crazy, because we've planted 17 churches over the last like 50 some years. Well, by God's grace, through some really incredible leadership, through a dependence on the Spirit in mobilizing prayer, deploying disciple makers, developing leaders, multiplying churches, since 2017, we have seen 17 new churches planted across Southern Michigan. And that is incredible. And now Mission Igniter is currently working with 45 different church plants and planters across the country. And so as Evergreen, we were part of that first wave of God doing something new in this region. And again, like, we are not alone doing our own thing. We are part of a larger movement of God in this day, seeing the gospel planted, new disciples raised up, multiplying disciples, multiplying leaders, multiplying churches. It's an incredible thing. So lastly, want to focus on our evergreen governance. So the board, so again, so we have pastors. So pastors are appointed, as I talked about, to the church. We're members of the conference, not of the local church. And so the board of administration serves as the governing body. So I serve on that as the non-voting chair. You can just read this. I'll just take a moment to just let this sit here so you can read it. But um, the board works with me to keep us on mission and to achieve the vision. We make sure that we're staying true to the vision and the spirit of the Free Methodist Church. The board works with me to establish missional goals. We evaluate our progress. We develop strategic plans. The board does risk mitigation, and we have a official handbook with policies and procedures. We also have the ability to develop resolutions for annual and general conferences. The board also provides financial fiscal oversight for us as a church. Um, they review and approve compensation. They appoint task groups as needed, and we keep minutes, financial reports, because the board members are corporate legal officers because we are an incorporated 501c3. And so the board serves as those legal officers to the state of Michigan. And then we also authorize and oversee local ministerial candidates and consecrated deacons in keeping with the Book of Discipline. And so this is how we are governed as a church. And so our board members have a 3-year term, and we also we can invite people to serve in a voice but no vote role as well if we feel that that's appropriate. But this is the work of our board. And so I'm going to pause here. And I want you to take time to reflect. So we talked about governance and leadership in this session. And so I want to hear what blessings, or it could be, you could see them as cons, do you see from being a part of a larger network and denomination, specifically the Free Methodist Church? What value do you see, if any, from the majority of the Free Methodist Church being outside the United States? What excites you? What challenges you? What questions do you still have? So take some time, fill out these questions, kind of reflect, write them in your notebook, read and explore the rest of the content in the Free Method in this You Are the Church book. And this is the end of session 3.